Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And yes, I am back in the flesh creating content once again for this new school year for my US history students. So without further ado, let's get into it. Man, has it been a minute since the last time we saw each other. Exactly. Long time ago. All right. So, US history, we're starting Origins of the American Nation, Chapter 1, Lesson 1. There we go. That was your warm up. So, objectives, you guys already know. Those are for me, not for you, but you should explain how the Americas became home to the diverse cultures, identify major areas of Spanish, French, and English settlement, describe reasons for English colonization, explain how the Enlightenment and Great Awakening influenced American thinking, hint, hint, last year, and discuss how growing tension between England and the colonies led to a revolution and independence. All right, so as you remember, as you recall, you only write down what is in red and the titles of the slides. So first humans in the Americas, the first humans arrived around 28,000 and 13,000 BCE before the Common Era. Most arrived via the land bridge connecting Russia and Alaska. And the first peoples were nomadic peoples, meaning they are people who continually move from place to place. We got some red here. So early Native Americans, these nomads finally settled down across the Americas and learned how to plant and grow crops. This small yet significant agricultural shift led to the beginnings of villages. And as populations expanded into these permanent villages, civilizations emerged. So as more and more people began to settle down and live off the land instead of moving from place to place, they started eating more, marriages, reproducing, all that. More families, more people. There you go, civilizations. So the regions, based on where these natives were located geographically across the Americas, each culture differed, especially in the North American continent. Farming, corn, squash, and beans were the main staple for the natives in the Southwest. There were hunters and gatherers in the Midwest, hunting buffalo. And of course, we had fishing on the Pacific coast. That's not to say it was only on the West Coast. Also, the Gulf of Mexico, Massachusetts Bay, they love to fish there too. Florida. So as you can tell by the different colors, the West Coast up here, fishing all up in the Canadian West Coast, hunters and gatherers hunting, fishing down here, like I said, Florida too. Can't forget about Florida. All right, so there's an interest in Asia, and this kind of is a little bit of recall from 7th grade history. As Europeans became more and more invested in trade, they wanted to find a more suitable route that didn't take them through the Arabic countries of the Ottoman Empire. They would charge an arm and a leg for people to cross the Silk Roads to get all the way from, towards India and China for those spices and silks along the Silk Road. Marco Polo, ring a bell. So under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of España, the Spanish monarchs funded a guy named Christopher Columbus, who said he would find a route via boat to establish trade with the West Indies and prove to everyone that the world was not flat. Christopher Columbus, however, he did not discover America. Little did he know there was an actual land mass between Europe and Asia in 1492. And he set sail across the Atlantic Ocean in his 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. He landed in present-day San Salvador Island in the Caribbean, tomato, tomato. He would make 3 more voyages throughout the Caribbean and Central and South America, claiming land for Spain, taking natives, and promising gold. Did he ever find it? Did he? So, here's a little meme. Gets national holiday for discovering America. Killed and enslaved millions of Native Americans. Brutal. All right, Spanish Pandora's box. Through Columbus's mishap, it turned into the discovery of the Americas, or led for further discovery of the Americas, with more and more explorations carried out via the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, the French, especially Spain. These monarchs wanted gold, gold, gold. You have what is called the Treaty of Tordesillas, which gave Spain the exclusive right to explore the new land of America, north, south. You do have an important figure, Bartolome de las Casas, who was one of the first critics of the Spanish treatment of the natives in this new land. He was a Spanish priest, came over trying to convert the natives to Catholicism, and he started to write down his documentation of the mistreatment of the natives by the Spanish, and would soon become a voice for the natives when people read his book. I think it's called The History of the West Indies. Let me know down in the comments if that's the correct title. And yeah, he became an ally for the natives and someone who became a quick critic of his own people, the Spanish. And here you have the Spanish Empire in red, and all of this was claimed for Spain. Now, if you recall, this little land is Brazil, and that was conquered by the pork and cheese, the Portuguese. Everywhere else, red, Spain. All right, the Europeans are coming. Native Americans introduced their farming techniques to the Europeans, to those that weren't hostile towards them, right? And Europeans introduced the natives to many, many more things, like horses, and better swords, better fighting, obviously manufactured goods from Europe, and especially the most important one, disease. God, disease ruined everything in world history. All right, Jamestown. Now, this is something you need to know for your midterm. Anything you see underlined in red, that's going to be either on your midterm or your final exam and or the unit test. So Jamestown was the first English settlement in North America, 1607. Remember, I'm not going to quiz you on when it was founded. 1607 is just like the starting date because it actually survived. The Virginia Company saw how prosperous this Jamestown colony had become and sent 4,500 more British immigrants. Local natives, however, got wind of this and attacked in 1622, almost crippling and toppling the entire Jamestown colony. A little bit further forward in pre-colonial American history, you have the Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower. You have a group of Pilgrims are a group of Puritans. Remember, Puritans trying to purify the Catholic Church of their religious practices. They were being persecuted in England by King James. They headed for Virginia because that's where most of the colonists were going to, or the British immigrants were going towards. But weather forced them and their boat in what is today called Cape Cod or the Massachusetts Bay. Now, they landed where England's government did not have authority over. England did not claim this land. And so the people aboard the ship devised their own set of self-regulating, not self-control, but, laws, government, and they called it the Mayflower Compact. So when they first came across the land, there are now these set of rules that everyone agreed to on the boat, and they're going to follow it so they can, be organized. The colonies, more colonies. With the successes of New Quebec, Jamestown, Plymouth, and Massachusetts Bay, the French and the English governments pushed hard for more exploration of the new land. And they wanted to take advantage of all natural resources the Americas had to offer. Sounds a little like imperialism if you know what I'm talking about. All right, so here's the New England colonies: New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Plymouth. The middle colonies of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, although Maryland is sometimes referred to as a southern colony. So, you know, I'm not gonna quiz you on like, why is Maryland a southern colony or why is Maryland not a middle colony? All right, and then you got the southern colonies: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Indentured servitude. So in order to survive in this new land, the colonists had to grow their own food. However, some of these colonists were a little hoity-toity, if you ask me, and they weren't going to do it themselves. Not all Europeans who fled Europe were rich, and therefore, you know, some of them were ex-cons, ex-felons, fleeing for religious purposes. And also this example of indentured servants came along as well. Now, indentured servants are people who owed money to these rich people, who were contracted to work to make up the money they had owed over a time period of their contract. Now, usual contracts lasted 7 to 9 years, 5 to 7 years, give or take, more, maybe less. And once those contracts ended, they were free to go. Here's a simple indentured servants definition. They were initially bound to their employers in exchange for free passage to the New World. Yes, you had to pay to cross the Atlantic, and that's money they did not have. So, hey, I'll work for you for free for 5 years. Take me there. So there's this battle for more land. More and more colonists are going to arrive after hearing about these new riches being found in the colonies. Colonists are going to need more land to cultivate. And if you remember from world history, more land equals what? That's right. More land equals more power. So the colonists are going to push the natives further and further west. Treaties and trade agreements are going to be made, of course, in the favor of the colonists. And of course, they want to keep expanding westward because all the land keeps getting gobbled up, and limitations by the British government and or other, the French government, Spanish government, they're going to prevent further westward exploration. They want to prevent more chaos and war with the natives, right? So you have indentured servants. Their contracts end, and they're left with no money, no land. Well, they start to gather up their own land and take land away from the rich plantation owners, and that's going to lead to some serious clashes, some rebellions, and these people, the wealthy, are going to figure out that, hey, if our indentured servants keep rising up and rebelling against us, that's not good. It's ruining profit margin. It's ruining me. It's taking money away from the profits I could be gaining. So they looked for a different type of group of people to come to the Americas to work for free, to not get paid, to be the type of person or group of people who won't rise up and who they can enforce their will upon without there being a rebellion. And of course, talking about slaves. So after more and more land would be acquired, the thought is, who's going to work this? Obviously not the rich, wealthy people. They're not going to do that. So the colonists, as we know, participated in the triangular trade, the Columbian exchange, whatever you want to call it. And they partook in the enslaved Africans coming to the Americas in exchange for the natural resources the Americas had to offer. And further down the line, slave codes were prevented from Africans owning property, receiving education, moving about freely, or even meeting in large groups. I think it's more than 10 people. So we're going to a little fast forward to around the 1700s, and we're going to talk more English, more American colonists. And so we got to, go a little bit more forward. And now Parliament is getting in the way. The triangular trade had allowed colonists to expand their trade, their wealth, and land. However, Parliament, England's lawmakers, enacted laws that limited the colonies' growth while furthering England's economic #gains. The purpose of colonies was to help England become richer. Frustrated by these limits, colonists would soon be encouraged by the events in England, which were going to allow for more and more freedom. I wonder if you all can think about that. But before we get there, we got to talk about mercantilism. And mercantilism was basically the world economy at the time. And in order to become more wealthy and powerful, the country had to gain more gold and silver by selling more goods to other countries than it bought from them. And the definition goes on to say a country should be more self-sufficient in raw materials than it has manufactured items. So, you buy the raw materials from the colonies, you sell it back to the colonies as manufactured items, and you sell it for double the price, make a little more money on the side, if you know what I'm saying. So tobacco will be turned into cigars, lumber, trees obviously turned into ships, and cotton woven into clothes. So here's a little picture. You have the colony interacting with the mother country, colony interacting with the mother country, but you can't have the colony interacting with the colony. No. So the Enlightenment, hey, we're back. The philosophers that put forth the theory that the physical world and human nature operated in an orderly way according to natural laws. They figured out these laws by using reason and logic. So the two treatises of government. In this book, John Locke, our boy John Locke, argued that the rights of a monarch to rule came by the people. All people were born with certain natural rights: life, liberty, and property. And these people come together to make a government. And in this social contract, it said that the government agrees, or the people agree to obey the government's laws, and the government would in turn uphold those people's rights: life, liberty, property. If a ruler violated those rights, people have a justified right to rebel. And there we have John Locke and my former student, who was nicknamed John Locke. Shout out Leticia. All right, so we have the social contract, and it kind of carries on after John Locke's second treatise on civil government. And in the social contract written by Rousseau, the government should be formed by the people's consent, who would make their own laws to be governed by. Makes sense, right? That's our boy Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Spirit of the Laws, written by Montesquieu. And he suggests that there are three types of political power: executive, legislative, and judicial. The powers should be separated into different branches of government. Separation of powers, that's the term. And each branch provides checks and balances from abusing its authority and becoming too powerful, too tyrannical. All right. Hopefully this sounds familiar. That's Baron de Montesquieu. Of course, you have the Great Awakening, which is the widespread resurgence of religious fervor, the high-strung fever of getting back into religion. It stressed piety and being born again, and new sects, new groups of Christianity were formed: the Baptists, the Presbyterians, and the Methodists. And old factions soon lost their members, like Jews, Christians, Catholics. Here you have a picture of one of these revival meetings. You have John Wesley, or John Weasley, here leading the giving a speech, giving a sermon. All right, now we're gonna fast forward more to about the 1750s. You have something called in America the French and Indian War. It was raged warfare in the North American frontier. The Ohio River Valley had not yet been completely settled by colonists. The French rivals were the rivals, and their Native Americans fought along with them. So it's the French and the natives against the British and the colonists. Of course, some other, rival Native American groups that didn't like the other Native Americans, you know what I'm saying? So a raged war from 1754 to 1759. This fighting actually was also simultaneously going on in Europe. It's known as the 7 Years' War. The long and short of it, Britain eventually wins. And the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763, 4 years later, will give Britain dominion over North America, NA North America. So now the Spanish are pushed to the side. It is strictly a British, the land that the French had was now owned by the British. So you'll see here's a map before the French and Indian War or during the French and Indian War, and all these land claims right here and right up here were between the French and the British. All right, and that's what they fought over. And now, after the French and Indian War, you have Spanish Louisiana, and then all of this is controlled by Britain. Now we're getting into the spoils of war and debt. England had a lot of debts to pay to defend their new territories. They literally fought 2 different wars on 2 different continents. Wars cost money. Parliament thought the colonies should share in these costs. So you have what is then passed, the Proclamation Act of 1763, in order to prevent further native unrest with the colonists. You have the Proclamation Line of 1763, which prevents colonial expansion westward into Indian territories along the Appalachian Mountains. Again, to avoid war with Native American groups. However, that's gonna not sit well with the colonists. They weren't happy. Western farmers are going to denounce this line. Eastern merchants are going to object these new tax policies. So colonists are going to do what they do best. They're going to smuggle goods without paying taxes on imports and exports. And then the Parliament is going to get wind of this, and they're going to create a new law, the Sugar Act of 1764, which is going to raise taxes on imports of sugar and molasses. Ugh. What are they going to drink their tea with? Not sugar? Of course they're going to pay. They got to pay it, like gasoline prices. All right, rage monster. So then you have the Stamp Act of 1765, and that's kind of the hair that broke the camel's back. It is going to require stamps to be bought and placed on most printed materials, any paper document. You got books, newspapers, letters, legal documents, got to have a stamp. And unlike traded goods, this was a direct tax to the people, the first of its kind on the colonists. And of course, they're not going to like it. Opposition and protests against England grow, and you have the saying, no taxation without representation. You can't tax us because we don't have a voice in Parliament back in England. So therefore, England can't tax us. You get that? So you have the Townshend Acts. As England was getting deeper and deeper into debt, because wars cost money, they needed to raise more money. How do you do that as a government? You raise taxes. So new acts were passed by Parliament 1767. The Townshend Acts put a new custom duties imports on glass, lead, paper, paint, and of course, tea, and not the drama. More protests would lead to more violence. You have something that happens in Boston. Just so you know, students, don't throw snowballs at a British soldier. You might die. A soldier who was guarding a customs house was hit with a snowball. He didn't like it. He called for backup. There's more pushing and shoving between the colonists in Boston. If you don't know, Boston, New England, is where most of the revolutionary fever against the ending, British dominion over the colonists happened in New England. More importantly, Boston. Therefore, shots were fired and 5 colonists were died, and this is called the Boston Massacre. 5 people died. Is it truly a massacre? You tell me. Parliament will repeal all of the Townshend Acts except the one on, you guessed it, tea. So here's the famous portrait by Paul Revere of the Boston Massacre. Tensions will be reduced. Trade with the colonies continued, however, so did the smuggling. Customs ships were burned. Suspects that were caught for burning these ships were taken back to England to be put on trial. Now, if you know anything about trial by jury of your peers, that is in strict violation, according to the colonists, because they are not a part of England. They are not a part. They are not British citizens. That's what they think. So therefore, they should not be hauled away back to England because they're not peers of the colonists. So therefore, they're gonna be found out guilty real quick. So the colonists created committees of correspondence to communicate with other colonies about the British and, tell them what's happening, what is up. In May 1773, another Tea Act was passed again. Colonists were feeling that they were getting pushed out of business, all this money being taxed. And then you have something called the Boston Tea Party. So the night before a new shipment of tea was to be delivered by the British East India Company, Bostonians dressed as NA, now this is a different NA, Native Americans, NA, Native Americans, dressed up as them in the middle of the night. They're going to pour out all over 300 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. Party on, Garth. Party on, Wayne. So then you're going to have, 2 different groups of people before the war actually starts. And, loyalist people, loyal to Britain, they're called, also nicknamed Tories, and they can be found in New York, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Obviously, the people who did the most trade with England. And then you have the Patriots or the Whigs, nicknamed Whigs, and they can be found more in the New England colonies and Virginia. The British are coming. So Britain seized of ammunitions and conquered, and from there they're going to set out from Boston. I don't know why I keep saying it like that. Anyways, Patriot leaders heard about this plan. You have Paul Revere and others were sent to spread the alarm. They're called Minutemen. And there's going to be a little skirmish at the Battle of Lexington. 8 colonists died. They continued on to Concord. They found the ammunitions empty, so they were forced to retreat. And this is the first appearance of guerrilla warfare. This hit and run, hide and seek kind of fighting, and that's going to actually help the colonists. Here's a picture of Paul Revere. Looks like Jack Black's doppelganger, if you ask me. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. All right. If you can do that voice, Mortal Kombat, fight. Here you have George Washington. Now we're getting into, the actual fighting. And if you remember from last year, for me, I teach my students the American Revolution and the Revolutionary War for Independence are 2 separate events. You have the American Revolution is more about the protests and rebellion and all that, repealing all the acts, okay, protests. The Revolutionary War is what it is, the war. So George Washington was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. The militia, the volunteer state militia, would be tested before Washington even reaches troops. However, early on, it's going to prove to be a stalemate. No one really winning, no one really losing. And it proved that the untrained militia could outlast one of the most feared armies, like Survivor. And that's going to build American confidence. Here's the man, the myth, the legend, George Washington. On the road to independence, 1775, Continental Congress sent King George III something called the Olive Branch Petition. It asserted loyalty that the colonists would remain loyal to the king and urged to resolve their grievances peacefully. King George said, no way, and condemned the colonies as enemies to the British Empire. Later on, you have Thomas Paine. He's going to write a book called Common Sense. He's going to label King George III as a tyrant, abusing the natural rights of the colonists. And later on, all the colonists are going to gather, Continental Congress. They're going to come up with something called the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if you heard about it. Pretty big idea. And it goes public July 4th, 1776. Here's T. Paine and his book, Common Sense. People who read his book, use your common sense and see what the British are doing to you, and then make your decision, right? All right, so the American Revolutionary War, 1776 to 1781. Cons. The Americans, they could not keep up with the British army in size, funding, discipline, and experience. However, the one thing they had on their side, fighting on home soil. They knew every crook, every cranny, every river, every stream, every hill, every field. They knew everything. The British didn't. They also had help from the local militias. The British support for the war was not all that great. However, they had other problems in their colonies and in Europe. Of course, Europe has a lot of problems. The long and short of it, I could bore you on with the deets, but here's the skinny, people. Early on, the British were winning. Washington then led a surprise attack and future wins. The army from Quebec met in Saratoga, unmatched by the Patriots. They surrendered. That boosted morale. The British surrendered. And because of that battle in Saratoga, the Americans came out on top. France was on the fence. Do I support my longtime enemy, forever enemy, Britain, or do I support these newfound Americans? And because the Americans won, France came to the aid of the American colonists in the form of Marquis de Lafayette. But that's not all. After Saratoga, Britain invaded the southern colonies in 1778. They seized Georgia, the Georgia backwoods, and Savannah. That was a big capital city. Not really capital city, but trading center in the South. General Cornwallis, general of the British Army, moved on to Charlestown, South Carolina. The Patriots surrendered. It was the greatest defeat in the war. However, the turning of the tide happened at the Battle of the King's Mountain in 1780, and they drove the British out from the South from that battle. I'm sorry if your hand hurts. Lots of notes. It's American history. Victory. The last major battle was at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781. Cornwallis would soon be trapped, and Washington and his army were quickly approaching. The French Navy blocked any British escape via boat. 8,000 troops surrendered October 19, 1781. War is over. However, as you know, there wasn't text messaging, there wasn't email. So fighting still continued after this battle, but once more and more places and towns heard that the British surrendered, they gave up. So the Treaty of Paris, 1783 was signed. Britain fully recognizes the United States as a sovereign and independent nation. Dun, dun, dun. There you go. All right, so that concludes this lecture. Hopefully you guys did enjoy that. Your homework, if Mr. Ovalle had prepared himself for this, your homework is page 13, questions 2 through 4, all right? So hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe. It helps your boy out. And make sure stay safe and wash your hands. See you in the next one. Peace.